Hello, hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Entertainment News. Since the US is now dropping bombs on Iran, I thought that I would hide myself in the existential horror of H.P. Lovecraft this morning and talk about The Last Days of H.P. Lovecraft. It is a French graphic novel, but now it is getting an American English language limited series adaptation. Not a limited streaming series, which I strangely believe was the topic of the news story when I began to read it, but it's a limited comic book run. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Before we do, one thing to ask of you: be kind. If you choose to join the comment section, and I welcome you to join the comment section, please be kind. All right then. So, why am I talking about this? Okay, so I am not a comic book reader. It's nothing personal. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. I did not have access to comic books at that sort of influential age, but we did have a pretty good little local small town library, which has since been washed away by the river. So I had access to a lot of books in those days, so I fell in love with H.P. Lovecraft, not with comic books. And by that point, I was off and running. So here we go. Boom Studios to adapt The Last Days of H.P. Lovecraft as a limited series. And of course, if you are any kind of fan of the channel, you realize that I have done reviews of each and every short story written by H.P. Lovecraft here on this channel in individual videos, so you can check that out in the playlist. But here we go. Boom Studios has announced that it is set to publish an English-language adaptation of the French hit graphic novel The Last Days of H.P. Lovecraft as a 4-issue limited series. It tells the dreamlike story of the very last day of horror pioneer and controversial writer H.P. Lovecraft and the final journey of a complex and tortured man facing his choices, his writings, and his wrongs at the very last moment of his life. You can check out an early unlettered sneak peek of The Last Days of H.P. Lovecraft here, and I'm going to scroll down through that in just a moment. But yeah, that sounds intriguing to me because, Lovecraft, kind of a complex figure, I guess. He's best known, perhaps, unfortunately, for his racism. I tend to believe that he repented of a lot of that racism as he grew up. He grew up in sort of an insular, small city, Rhode Island, and the world was changing on him very rapidly in the early 1900s. Racism pretty rampant in those days anyway, and inevitably he married a Jewish woman. But yeah, he was known for his racism. It is slightly entered into some of his fiction, not as heavily as some people would have you believe, but if you're looking for it, you can sort of find it, and because you're looking for it, you're going to find it everywhere. In real life, yes, he did have a severe problem with his racism, but he was still a pretty complex figure. He was born into a family that was rich, but suddenly lost its money. The death of his family, living with his aunts, and sort of probably craving love, but having access to a lot of literature, which sort of caused him to sort of pour himself into books and then later writing itself. So there's a lot of interesting things about him, but I think it makes it worth examining in sort of a biographical way. And here it's been done in a graphic novel. So let's look at these pictures. I'm sorry that you're not going to be able to probably see the whole image on this setup, but I sort of dig that. Not a huge comic book fan, but I like it. It sort of has that sort of a stylized watercolor look to it. Anytime you see tentacles and eyeballs, you know you're in Lovecraft country. I really dig that. That is sort of dreamlike. I could see that representing the dreamlands from Lovecraft. Sort of some sort of tortured hell. I sort of dig that. Sort of a slightly primitive, sort of trippy watercolor style here. Ooh, look, eyeball. More eyeballs, more birds. That presumably is Lovecraft dying in bed. He died of stomach cancer, which was probably semi-treatable maybe for him. He just waited too long. I realized there was not a whole lot of treatment for cancer, but if something could have been cut out, perhaps he could have lived longer. But he died in his early 40s. That dude, presumably a doctor, looks a lot like Edgar Allan Poe to me, which is sort of a spiritual predecessor of Lovecraft, certainly one of his influences. Yeah, it definitely looks like Poe. I have to believe that that's intentional. But Yeah, there you go. Interesting. I'm not likely to buy it again. Sort of not a comic book collector, not a graphic novel reader, but perhaps the coming um, of this story to English might result perhaps in that limited streaming series or perhaps a movie. Lovecraft is one of the great untapped resources yet to be sort of conquered in the TV and film world. Yeah, there's been adaptations, usually sort of low budget indie films for for almost as long as he's been gone. Very few of them have sort of cracked into the mainstream or had the budget to do things correctly or in a way that's satisfying to their readers. One of the best one I think was Color Out of Space with Nicolas Cage, who is well suited for that role. So I think that yeah, it's definitely some possibility. Perhaps somebody, some aspiring filmmaker, some studio head, perhaps, going to pick up a copy of this now in English and check it out, and perhaps buy the rights and greenlight something like that. But yeah, there you have it. If you are a graphic novel aficionado and a Lovecraft aficionado, this may be of interest to you. But in the meantime, I'm going to go on about my day, watch some racing here in a couple hours. But in the meantime, keep it creepy.